Okay, let's get started. Panelists, could I just ask you to check that you are on mute, just so we make sure we don't have any background noise. Thank you very much. Welcome everybody to this afternoon's event, jointly hosted by the TUC and the Women's Budget Group, Equalities and Employment, How Do We Stop 2020 Rolling Back on Women's Rights at Work? I'm Sian Elliott, I'll be your chair for today's event. I'm the Women's Equality Policy Officer at the TUC, where we collectively represent over 6 million working people with 48 trade unions across the country. I want to just take a moment to say a special big thanks to Jenna Norman, who has been working behind the scenes to set up today. Thank you so much for all of your support and efficiency organising today. And so too my thanks to the team at the Women's Budget Group, who work tirelessly and have done throughout this crisis to put forward policies and ideas upon which we can build a more gender equal future and ensure that women and women's groups are fully represented, they are heard and listened to in economic debates. We'll hear shortly from our brilliant panel, two of whom were commissioners on the Women's Budget Group's Commission on a Gender Equal Economy, a 2-year project, the final part of which has landed at a unique moment in global history. The coronavirus pandemic has brought much to light. When faced with crisis, care and kindness has come to the fore. We have seen the way that key workers keep us going, those low-paid carers, nurses, retail workers, cleaners and delivery drivers, many of whom had been branded unskilled earlier in the year, were heralded as heroes. And many of these workers were women, often on low pay, without secure employment contracts. Many were migrant women or those from Black and minoritized backgrounds facing a toxic mix of sexism and racism in the workplace. Women who were putting their lives on the line to keep our economy and country going without access to proper personal protective equipment, PPE, or without proper risk assessments. We've also seen that government intervention is possible, and when it happens, it's powerful. And so too the difference that trade unions make to women's working lives, and that we win on issues that matter. We saw the job retention scheme and statutory sick pay move to a day one right, big economic wins for the trade union movement. And we know that it's been our workplace reps fighting discrimination on the ground in our workplaces against employers seeking to cut costs at all costs, who've been demanding health and safety compliance and proper measures in place to protect the health of workers. It's those trade union reps making a difference in workplaces across the country. And we've seen that crises do not impact everyone equally. While we may be weathering the same storm, the virus has hit the most disadvantaged the hardest, and it's worsened pre-existing structural inequalities that women face at work. Inequalities that are embedded in our society and that require bold, concerted action to eliminate it. And above all, we've seen that we, the people, we make the economy and we sustain the economy. And as Women's Budget Groups say, the economy is not a black box, something we can't understand or influence, something separated from us. We are the economy and we can do things differently. And having that understanding is not only empowering, but it can embolden us to ask, what kind of world do we want to create? What kind of economy do we want to make? And that's what we're here today to focus on, the role of trade unions in particular in securing a different economy to the one we had before. As we build back better, what does that mean? We want an economy built on equality with fairness and care at its heart. I'll come briefly now to some housekeeping. Gloria, I think you may be sharing your screen, which is probably better than my face being superimposed on everybody. But just so you're aware, maybe if you could try to unshare your screen, that would be brilliant. And to our attendees, you are so welcome. Thank you for being here today. And we are really looking forward to hearing from you, your comments and your questions. Can you please use the chat function to introduce yourselves, talk about any issues that you want to, but use the Q&A function specifically to direct questions towards the panel. We'll be monitoring that Q&A for the questions, not the chat box. So please make sure to use that. Panelists, I'm going to keep you to your time. I know as trade unionists, we often like to go over, but we really have a lot to get through today. So I'm going to ask you some brilliant questions and I'll introduce the amount of time you've got to answer them. And I will interrupt you when your time is up, just so that we can make sure everybody has their chance to speak. So please do forgive me in advance for doing so. So to get started, our brilliant speakers, I'm delighted that we're joined by Sarah Veale, Commissioner on the Gender Equal Economy, former Head of Equality and Employment Rights at TUC, and a board member at the Equality and Human Rights Commission. We're also joined by the brilliant Faiza Shaheen, a fellow Commissioner of Sarah's on the Gender Equal Economy. She's Director of Class and former Labour Party candidate for Chingford and Woodford Green. We're also joined by Gloria Mills, who is the Equalities National Secretary at Unison, Chair of the TUC Race Relations Committee and Chair of the European TUC Women's Committee. She wears many hats and joins us with them all today. And finally, but no means least, we've got Ruth Cross, National Equality Officer at the Retail Workers Union, Usdaw. Ruth has developed in her time there a number of incredibly important Usdaw campaigns that focus on addressing issues of mental health, work-life balance, violence against women, and preventing racism. So Sarah, I'm going to come to you first, and you've got around 5 minutes to answer this question. The Commission has just published its final report, Creating a Care Economy, a Call to Action. I wonder, could you tell us and all of our attendees a little bit about your experience on the Commission, the key insights you gained, and what you think are the key calls to action? Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Sian. It's lovely to be back amongst so many friends again, I must say. It was always a pleasure working at the TUC, and it's been an absolute joy working on the Commission as well. I suppose the first thing to say about it is that it's one of those occasions where absolutely 100% I learned far more than I put in. Now, that's not to belittle my input, I hope, but I learned so much in my time on the Commission. I think I'd started off rather casually, assuming that the economy is set in stone, and it is like it is. And all we as women can do is just kind of work within it without really necessarily challenging the basic precepts on which it's all organised. So it was a real, what's the word for it, taking the plank out of your eyes moment for me to start thinking about how we don't have to accept that the economy is organised in the way that it is organised. And if you think about it, a lot of the talk that's going on at the moment about restructuring the economy has very much been about recreating or creating more and more construction and jobs like that, sort of making jobs that very much seem to me to be about the sorts of jobs that have always been done by men. That obviously begs a side question there about why it is that men do these jobs, and these jobs tend to be better paid than the jobs that tend to be done by women. But setting aside that, which is difficult to set aside, but setting that aside, I think what's so fantastic about the work the Commission has done is that it's had a look at issues like caring and the environment and said, actually, what is valuable in society? And the COVID pandemic has really brought to the fore the fact that in order to thrive, let alone just stay alive, live, let alone thrive, you absolutely have to have people there who can care for you, who have the kind of experience needed to make you better when you're sick. And a whole load of other issues came up behind that. What is the role of people when they're not in work? People look after children, they look after elderly relatives. A vast amount of the caring in society is actually done on an unpaid basis. But why should the economy operate like that? Why should the economy be based on caring jobs being either low paid or done voluntarily, largely by women? And not properly recognised? Why should jobs in shops previously just been considered, not terribly important, and suddenly be elevated into key jobs that keep the supply of food through to the public going? So all these issues about why the economy prioritises one thing over another are actually all about the fact that the economy has been shaped, constructed and run by men, certainly in Western economies, forever. And this Commission is a massive challenge to that. It's saying, right, let's have a look at what is actually valuable and how we place value on it, and how we organise work, and how what we do at work reflects what we do at home and brings our home experience in, and how it all also interacts with key environmental issues. Because the cruelty of capitalism, to be blunt about it, is that it doesn't care what it trashes. And I think the state of the world today is for a large part down to the way in which capitalism has organised work, with dangerous emissions, pollution, and all the rest of it. Of course, it is partly to do with consumer use of commodities and so on, but really work is an essential part of that. And the way the economy is organised at the moment doesn't lend itself to doing all the massive changes we need to make to the environment. So I think, for me, the key thing about what we've done is to make a really constructive, clever economic argument for completely reforming and reshaping the economy in a way which would value all the things that women, I think, have known for so long are highly valuable, but turn them into a formal part of the way in which the economy operates and delivers. So for me, this is a double win. It's a win for all people and for the planet. This doesn't sound too grandiose, but it's a massive win actually for women and their role both at work and in their lives outside work, as carers, as homekeepers often, and all the rest of it. So it's huge. And I think if we can use this opportunity that we have at the moment to really push and promote these ideas with whoever will listen to us, not just the government, certainly, definitely the opposition, but also all the other institutions that we have to rub along with, the regulatory bodies and all the rest, we can start to build a consensus that this is no longer serving its purpose in the way that the majority of the population need and I think want. And we can make changes, and here's where we start. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And that was under time. That was absolutely brilliant. And really interesting issues that we can dig into more shortly about the way we organise work, the way we organise the economy, and how do we build those links with other stakeholders to make sure we push for change and we push for power and influence. Faiza, if I come to you, you were also a commissioner along with Sarah. And I know the work that you do at CLASS, you cover issues such as employment, but also the financial system, the macro economy, public services and housing. And I wondered, your aim there at CLASS is to ensure policies on the side of everyday people. Could you tell us a little bit about that perspective that you both brought to the Gender Equal Economy Commission and what you took from being part of it?
Definitely. Thank you for inviting me to this. And I just also want to give my personal thanks to the Women's Budget Group for all of the work they've done really in pushing this forward, and just how excellent they've been with the launch, in the report, and just really trying to take the messages of the report out to different audiences. For us at CLASS, I'm an economist by training, but everything I look at is through an equalities lens. And one of the things that we really do focus on and elevate within our work is to really think about the intersections of race, class and gender, disability, and really just force ourselves to think about policies from those perspectives. And this is, this piece of work and the work that Women's Budget Group does has actively sought to show those intersections. You can't talk about the care sector without understanding that's a lot of migrant women, people of colour that work within that sector. And one of the things that I was really excited about when I was asked to join this commission was the opportunity to really get into why so often women's work is low paid. What's considered to be women's work is low paid. Back in 2011, when I worked at the New Economics Foundation, we were doing some research into where the good jobs for non-graduates lay and in which sectors. And at one point I drew this table looking at the typical sectors that non-graduates work in. So distribution, retail, hospitality, care, construction. And immediately, when I also looked at what the gender mix was within those sectors, it was just so clear that as soon as a sector was mainly men, so construction or wholesale, for instance, the wages were much higher compared to, say, retail and care in particular, even though, that wasn't to do with education, that wasn't to do with how long it took to train for those jobs. And it really struck me at that time, is like, what's going on here? The economy is sexist. The market is valuing people in the way that humans value people. And unfortunately, we know that over time and through generations of patriarchy, racism, and the rest of it, we value women less, and we value people of color less. And so, you know, one of the things that was so excellent about this report is that it really, and this commission, is that it really got into some of that, and it really did call that out for what it was. And, you know, for me, that's, the recommendations are important of this report, not just because it says what we need to do in the care sector, not just because about wages and welfare and all of those policies that we are quite used to hearing, at least within the trade union movement now, but also because it says that we need a change in our mindset. We need to think very differently about what the economy is, who it should be for, and how we should value people's work. And, you know, I know people have said this already, Sian and Sarah, I mean, you've said this already in the sense of, you know, Priti Patel came out with this big speech in February, terming care workers, you know, hospitality, all of these people as low skilled. Within weeks, they went from being low skilled to key workers. But none of those people have had a pay rise afterwards, right? Or even in the middle of it still. And so, you know, the thing that I really like about this report, and I think one of the things that we should be proudest of, is that it doesn't just give a series of policy prescriptions. It also says that we need a fundamental shift in our values, in our thinking, in our approach. And that's really what we need to do going forward, I think. And this is one of the things we've learned at class as well, is that unless we get the narrative and the messaging right, unless we really get this to stick in people's minds as something that's fundamental, we will miss this opportunity, because it's horrific that it's taken this to wake some people up to the value of different jobs. But you can see that thinking very quickly close, unfortunately. And we really need to push at this moment. And I think one of the things that was interesting from the launch was the polling that was done, that showed that 69% of people would be willing to pay more tax in order to support well-paid and secure jobs for everyone. You know, how do we convert that into social movements, pressure on government to do the right things? Because one of the things I'm really afraid of, and I'm already seeing happen, is that, oh, well, we don't really have the money, we can't afford to do this right now, which is rubbish from an economic point of view, but it is the typical excuse that will come out as public debt rises. And so, yeah, really, really proud of the report, like really, you know, value what I heard and what I learned from the commission. But this really is just the very beginning of the fight.
Thank you very much, Faiza, and thank you for you and Sarah and for all your work that you've done putting into this report. And to pick up on something you were saying, Faiza, if we aren't intersectional, we've got to look at, if we're fighting for gender equality, with a racial lens, with a disabled workers lens, with a sexuality lens, with a class lens, we have to make sure everything we're doing is intersectional, because as Kimberly Crenshaw says, if we aren't intersectional, some of us, the most vulnerable, are going to fall through those cracks. And I think that's something that we can come on to, and it's certainly something that trade unions, that's what we fight for, equality for everybody in the workplace. So I wonder then if I can come to you, Gloria, and ask you, what do you think is the role, in light of everything that Faiza and Sarah have said, and this opportunity that we have right now before that door closes, what is the role of trade unions in changing the world of work to achieve a gender equal economy for every woman at work? Gloria, if I come to you.
Sorry, I've got to remember to unmute. Can you hear me now? Okay, just to say, thank you all very much, Sian and Women's Budget Group, for organising this event. I think it's very important and it's very critical. You know, if we didn't have trade unions, we would have had to create them now. And I think it's really important when we say what the role of trade unions are in terms of changing the world of work, and to achieve a more gender equal economy. I think the biggest issue is we have to shift the balance of power. That is what is so crucial if we are going to bring about change. And the reason is that we as trade unions were created to challenge the unfettered abuse of management power, the unfettered abuse of corporate power, and also to ensure that we had some equilibrium and balance between capital and labor. And we must remember that when we talk about capital and labor, we are talking about removing the underbelly of exploitation that actually determines what's valuable and what's not valuable. And what we have seen is that women's role in society have been undervalued because women have been seen as a form of cheap labor, and whose rights could be dispensed with at a time of crisis. And we have to change that paradigm. We have to change the way in which we are seen in society. And what Sarah said about the economy and the male predominance in terms of how the economy works is so true. The economy is designed by men for men and to serve the interest of men. And it does not recognize and value and reward the contribution that women make to the economy and to society. And that's where trade unions have been playing a vital and a key role in terms of changing the agenda, changing the structure, but changing the culture, not just in trade unions and in the world of work, but also in society. And what we have to understand is that our most precious asset as a society is our children. And we have a value structure that puts and values a car before a child. And that's what I see all the time in terms of where men's values are and in terms of where women's values are. And we need to change that. And so we need to shape a new normal. And what we need to do is to have a new narrative that puts the care economy at the heart of the debate and the discussion we're having. Because if we value infrastructure and physical infrastructure and material infrastructure and capital infrastructure ahead of the care infrastructure, then we will not be achieving that balance that values women and reward women in proportion to their contribution in society. So we need to shape that new normal as trade unions. And the way we shape that is that we need to change the model that has been operating for the last 30 years. We need an end to privatization of women's jobs. Compulsory competitive tendering, which started in the 80s, have impoverished women. That's the first thing. So we need to say that we need to stop the exploitation. And the way we stop the exploitation is that we need to give women the full rights. And when I talk about women, I'm talking about disabled women, Black women, young women, older women, migrant women, LGBT women. We need that intersectional approach, but we need to end exploitation. And in order to end exploitation, we need a new model that values care. But also, we need to value our public services more. And that means we need to make sure that our public services work for women and work for our society. And when we look at public services, we need to get the private contractors, the profits out of our public services so that we put people before profit. If you hear some of the scandal about the pay that some people are being paid in the private sector, £7,000 a day, to sort out a test and trace system that's costing £12 billion, and it's being done on a spreadsheet, a 25-year-old Excel spreadsheet that cannot even accommodate the capacity of today's data. We know that we are being sold.
But we will come back
sorry.
round to you. I just want to make
okay.
chance to hear from Ruth, but I hear you loud and clear.
Thank you, but we just need a new change and a new model that values care. Thanks.
Absolutely, and you've articulated exactly what trade unions are fighting for our public services back to work for women. Ruth, I wonder if you can tell us a bit more about your perspective from Usdaw about the role of trade unions in securing a gender equal economy.
Thank you so much, Sian, and it's really exciting to follow on from Gloria and from Faiza and from Sarah. I think for me, you know, first and foremost, when we think about the role of unions in changing the world of work, it's about being there for women who on a daily basis are having to deal with the pressures and the stresses of working in an unequal economy. So whether it's women in retail who can't get shifts that fit with their family, whether it's a woman who's having to deal with sexual harassment at work or with domestic violence at home, I think, you know, our role is about saying to women, we're here for you, we care, we understand the pressures you're under, we understand the reality of your daily lives, and we have something to offer. So I think for me, our role is about being there at those strategic life moments when a woman might turn to her union. You know, a really big issue in retail is women who are coming back from maternity leave, who will very often be told that the only shifts available are shifts that start at 6 a.m. or that finish at midnight. And nobody here needs me to say why that's just not a feasible way to work with a young baby, particularly if you're a single parent. So our role in changing the world of work is in a sense about changing the world of work one member at a time. So every time we resolve something for a woman, we put another brick in the wall, if you like, of creating a gender equal economy. But I think our role clearly goes beyond the level of the individual, and it's about pushing for a much broader recognition and working with amazing organisations like the Women's Budget Group, like the TUC, you know, like think tanks such as CLASS. It's about pushing for that broader recognition from government and from employers that the unpaid care work that women do, and I'm so pleased we're focusing on care, and I really welcome the Commission's report, which has this concept of care right at its heart. And, you know, for our members, this daily stress of juggling work and care is absolutely core. So I think our role is about pushing for a much broader recognition that the unpaid care work that women do, you know, the social reproduction that women do is of enormous economic and social value, and that women are entitled to employment protection for carrying out that work. So I think for us, you know, a key part of our role in the world of work is about saying to women, to low paid women, to Black women, to lesbian women, to disabled, to young women, we care and we understand the pressures that you are under. And I think we have to be really clear that we have to be grounded in the daily lived experience of the women that we represent and that we seek to represent. Unions are great at addressing some of those really big picture issues about macroeconomics, about politics, about industrial strategy. Absolutely right that we do that. But I think we really have to be clear that we are putting just as much focus on connecting with the issues that matter to women on a daily basis. And our reps tell us that, you know, if you're in a store recruiting and organising and talking to women, the issues that are coming up day in, day out are issues of care and of juggling work and care. And so we change the world of work by starting, you know, our starting point has to be what is going on for women, where are women at? You know, if we sit down with a woman in a canteen and the woman tells the union rep, well, actually for me, what really matters is the fact that my shift never finishes on time, so I consistently miss the last bus home. That has to be our starting point. And it's not just an individual issue. We have to broaden that out to the collective. And I was so pleased, Faiza, that you talked about, you know, this issue of messaging, because I think the other thing I just want to say before winding up is that, you know, I think we change the world of work by getting the messaging right. There's a huge appetite out there for change, as Sarah has said, as Faiza has said, as Gloria has said already. You know, there's a real mood at the moment for wanting to see change, for wanting to see decent paying conditions, for job security, for pay rises for workers. And I think we change the world of work by focusing on, yes, we talk about the problems, but we also focus on the fact that we have solutions. You know, trade unions are very practical, solution-driven organisations. We want to get things done. And I think if we want to change the world of work and create a gender equal economy, we have to carry people with us. And that means getting the messaging right, that we don't just talk about solutions, we excite people about what is possible. Thank you, Sian.
On that note, Ruth, I think that's a brilliant note and a segue into my next question, actually, because I'm going to take us back one step. I know that we said there are solutions and we're going to come to those. But Faiza, I wondered if I could come to you next and ask you your thoughts about what are the biggest challenges to women's working rights right now?
So the number one thing, and this has been the case for a while, but is accelerating because of COVID-19, is precariousness. It's job insecurity. It's the fact that partly through privatization, partly because of how employers have been allowed to exploit groups, and often women, migrants, people of colour, 0-hour contracts, short-term contracts. Now employers are turning around, whether they be in the tourist industry or aviation, whether they be in hospitality. And for some of them, there's a genuine point about, you know, they're in real dire straits and not going to get the same kind of support from government that they've had up to this point. And they're saying, well, we'll put you on part-time, or we'll put you on a 0-hour contract, or we'll, and also a process of firing and rehiring on lower rights. And this is a really big thing, and it's gonna, you know, I'm at the beginning of the year when COVID kicked off, and I was looking at the figures, it just really struck me we're going to end the year with people, not just more people out of work, but more people in precarious work, and women will be disproportionately affected by that because they work in the sectors that are already most insecure. And I was just listening to Gloria and Ruth there, and one of the big things is, in terms of, and I will talk about solutions in a minute, is that, you know, business owners, I mean, I know there's a specific issue right now, some of this is genuine, but there's also opportunities taken to drive down rights and wages, and some of that is happening, and we can see that, we hear that through the trade union movement. So that alongside, you know, universal credit going back down, I mean, it only went up by £20, that, you know, women, again, the ongoing issues with care, as Ruth has spoken about, like juggling work with care, that is a really difficult situation that women find themselves in. And one of the surveys we did back in April was, we asked people how far away they were from not being able to pay their mortgage or rent, and 25% of people came back and said, I'm a month away from not being able to pay my mortgage or rent if my wages stop or decline. But it was higher for women. It was a third of all women said that. So this is the conundrum, the horrific situation of all of the bad things coming together. So one of the things I'm really worried about is that we can have this conversation at this level about, you know, the need to pay care workers more, to do much more to make a gender equal economy. We can have that conversation, and meanwhile the realities in the labour market are actually getting worse for women.
Yeah, thank you, Faiza. That's yeah, absolutely. The casualisation, a proper social security net, a proper day's wage. And Sarah, if I come to you next, I know that you've been working on these issues at the TUC for a long time, and you were involved in the Temporary Agency Work Directive. I wonder, what have you seen in terms of the biggest challenges to women's working rights right now, and how do they reflect those issues you've been working on for a number of years?
Well, there is a really scary feeling that things are in danger of moving backwards at a very fast rate if we're not on the ball and very quick to intervene and stop that. I mean, exactly, I completely agree with everything that Faiza said. The issue, which I know Gloria and Ruth will particularly get and understand, of course, is that it's notoriously difficult to organise women in the precarious parts of the economy because they're atomised. They're often doing 3 or 4 jobs at the same time, with different employers and with the most extraordinarily archaic employment arrangements. So that's a huge challenge, but I know the unions are rising to that. I just want to really, it's just a question of adding to what others have said here now, because everyone's been so good. But I think one of the biggest things that's going to cause massive problems, and we mustn't take our eye off it, is the impact of Brexit. Because once we're outside the single market, never mind whether Johnson and his gruesome cronies managed to patch together some sort of last-minute deal with the EU, women's rights, to an extent, not entirely, but to a large extent actually, derive now from European laws and protections. Played a big part across the European Union in securing. So a whole range of issues, from equal pay to pregnancy discrimination protection, part-time working protection, fixed-term contracts protection, all of which had a huge impact on women's rights, are going to go. So once the government's finished messing up everything on Brexit, I think a really big fear is that they will just allow, in a sort of orgy of deregulation, having introduced far more red tape to deal with lorries in Kent, they'll then think we've got to throw some more red meat at our backbenchers. Let's do some massive deregulation of employment rights. That's always popular with the right wing of the Tory party, probably the whole of the Tory party. So I think that's a massive threat, because a lot of women's rights do, you know, derive from European law. The other thing I think, which may in some ways go hand in glove with this, is I worry about cultural upheavals that are going on at the moment and the increase in hate crime. And we all know the tragedy of violence against women in their homes, which has massively increased because of women having to be in their homes far more, often locked in with a very dangerous partner. And my worry is that there's a sort of cultural war beginning to develop, part of which is going to be about women's rights and women's place, you know, in society. And again, we've got to, by persuasion, campaigning and good communicating, make absolutely sure that the end result of all this horror isn't that women start slipping back in the public focus and becoming what they were when I started work at the TUC all those many, many years ago, second-class citizens exploited both at work and, I'm afraid, at home. So huge amounts of work to do, but I hope that's between us. I think we've pinpointed the main ones.
I think absolutely, and I wonder, Ruth, if I can come to you and then to Gloria, with all of that in mind, what groups do you think are most at risk of the impact of deregulation, casualisation, that impact of Brexit? And from your work as the Retail Workers Union, who do you think are most at risk from some of these issues?
Thank you, Sian. I suppose, yeah, just a couple of groups of women to focus on in particular. And I think the first one, going back to our earlier conversations, is around, you know, women with caring responsibilities. And we see already, don't we, that as employers are beginning to make decisions about job losses, you know, about redundancy and dismissal, it's very often women with caring commitments who are being pushed out of the workforce, you know, very often unfairly. I think 4 out of 10 women who've been made redundant since the crisis began have said that they felt that childcare was a key factor. The absence of childcare was a factor in them being pushed out. Maternity Action have done amazing work to focus on the issue of pregnancy discrimination, haven't they? But I think for us, what we're seeing is a you know, real concerns around the situation for young women in particular. So since the crisis began, significant numbers of young women have been taken on, particularly in supermarkets, but they're on very low hours contracts, which have, you know, completely become the standard in retail now. So you'll have significant numbers of young women who are on contracts that will only guarantee around 10 hours work a week, but clearly they'll be expected to flex up and flex down as the employer requires, often at very short notice. How on earth you can plan your childcare on a contract like that? We've got significant numbers of young women who are just on a series of temporary contracts that keep getting renewed. And I think there's often an assumption that young workers don't have commitments outside of work and can come and go as they please. But we know from the TUC's own research that 1 in 3 young workers is themselves a parent. And so I think really backing up Faiza's comments about, you know, growing numbers of women and particularly young women being on those types of contracts, they're the sector of the workforce that are most likely to be on low hours, precarious contracts, who are most likely to find it difficult to move out of low pay. And I think there's a real issue, just in winding up, Sian, around, you know, that type of working is about pushing women to the fringes of the labour market. And women in those kind of roles and on those type of contracts, not only may they not qualify for employment rights because they don't have the length of service and they don't meet the qualifying conditions, but even where they do, young women tell us that they feel extremely vulnerable about asserting their rights. And we know that one of the key factors in whether or not you will assert your employment rights is how securely attached to the labour market you feel. And we know that young women in particular are the group that are least securely attached to the labour market.
And Gloria, coming to you, you're chair of the ETUC, the European TUC Women's Committee. So I wonder, with all that you've heard from the other panelists, who do you think is most at risk and what are they most at risk from?
Okay, well, I think in terms of the UK, I think Sarah and Ruth and Faiza have already said what the big challenges are, and unemployment, job losses, and the redundancy is one of the biggest issues. But pregnancy and maternity related redundancy, it's not just in the UK, but it's across the EU as well. And I think it's really important that we need a more robust approach to defend women's rights in the workplace. And the point Sarah made about people working in casual jobs and being unable to organize them, I think that's a big issue that we need to address now, because in my union, in Unison, we have been, a lot of the women who have been working in the main as home carers, we have been organizing them. And I must say, you know, 3 weeks ago, we won a big case for them against Haringey Council, where they were being paid below the national minimum wage because they were not being paid under the working time regulations for travel to and from work. And that was taking them, and you know, with these 15-minute contracts going to different people's homes, it meant that, you know, they were not being adequately paid, and we won in excess of over £100,000. And we're now using that in terms of recruiting members. But the point that Sarah made, with the changes, all of these rights emanates from the EU, and leaving the EU, we are not sure what will happen in terms of protecting those rights. So we need to have a more robust approach to defend those rights. And as Lord Justice as Lord Justice Bridge said in the Brown versus Stockton-on-Tees case, we must not allow employers to use the labour of pregnancy or redundancy rather, to weed out pregnant and maternity related cases. So I think we need to hold the Equality and Human Rights Commission to account. They have the capacity under the 2006 legislation to bring test cases for groups of workers. And we need to, I think this is one action that we need to make sure happens. They need to put a case on groups of workers and submit non-discriminatory notices to employers. We have to do more on this. The other point I think is really critical in terms of we have to protect older women in the workplace and younger women. And I think it's really important that, you know, we force the pace of change, and we need to start bringing group-related cases, using our collective power to bring collective class action-based claims. So you register a collective grievance, you register a collective dispute, and then you take the case collectively to ACAS if you're trying to resolve it, or if not, you take these cases on behalf of women and protecting them in order to make new case law in the UK. So these have to be strategic cases.
Gloria, our next question, brilliantly.
Sorry,
no,
I'm thinking ahead.
Time for Q&A. I just want to make sure we've got time for some audience questions. So I'm going to do a really quick fire round, building on what Gloria was saying there about what needs to change. We need to be able to organise women, to bring class action suits. And I wonder if I can come to you, Sarah. You mentioned earlier about stakeholders. How do we continue to make sure equality is prioritised in the middle of Brexit, in the middle of looming redundancies and huge job losses, in the middle of COVID? How do we make sure, if I can, one sentence or two, how can we continue to prioritise equality at work?
You have to engage with them. The CBI are engaging with the Women's Budget Group and the Commission work, and have shown a lot of support. Actually, make sure that all the other people involved in the world of work understand the massive contribution that women have made. It makes business sense, I'm afraid, as much as everything else.
Brilliant. Ruth, if I come to you, how do we engage with employers? What needs to change? How do we do it in one sentence or two?
I think we're doing it. I think government may not be prioritising equality at work, but I think the trade union movement is. And I think, you know, the achievements of the trade union movement since the crisis began are nothing short of phenomenal. And I think, you know, whether it's pregnancy and maternity suspension, whether it's the furlough scheme, whether it's changes to sick pay, I think we're doing it, Sian. I think we keep on doing what we're doing.
Build on the good stuff and keep it going. Gloria, I know you touched on what needs to change. I'm wondering if a sentence or two you wanted to just build on anything that's been said. How do we prioritise equality?
Well, as I said, I think we need to take a collective approach to it, and I think an intersectional approach, and we need to bring claims on behalf of groups of workers, and we need to force the EHRC to do that. That's in their remit. Trade unions, Sarah could tell you, we fought hard and argued for unions to be able to bring class action cases, and we were told, oh no, you don't need to, all you need to do is to refer it to the EHRC. So I think we need to do that, refer it to them and get them to bring the group class action claims so that we have those test claims. But the most important thing I want us to do is, you know, we have to reinstate gender pay reporting. You know, I mean, I am not prepared to have women's issues and pay issues always put to the back of the queue in every crisis. We would never achieve it. It would take us, you know, 58 years before we even get to close the gender pay gap. So we must not play that game of deferring women's rights and pay equality and gender equality. So unequal pay has to be at the top of the agenda, and we need to campaign I believe for two things. One, we need to campaign for trade unions to be able to bring class action claims in court. I think we need a big campaign on that. And I think we need to be able to bring collective claims on behalf of groups of members in terms of multiple claims. And we also need to reinstate gender pay reporting, gender pay gap reporting. Just to say one thing, at the EU level, Ursula von der Leyen has agreed that she would bring this in 100 days, agreed to bring it in by the 4th of November, have just deferred it, and we are saying no to that. Women are not going to wait 100 years, and in the case of France, 1,000 years for equal pay. You know, women need it, and we need it now.
We do, and equality is not a nice to have, it's a fundamental. Faiza, do you have anything? How do we continue to prioritise equality in a sentence or two?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing here is about building power. I mean, you know, employers, men, the rest of it, they will exploit who they can. And, you know, this is why I run a trade union backed think tank, and I'm really proud to be part of the trade union movement, is because it is about building power, it is about building those social movements. So for me, you know, how do we become too big, too tough to mess with? And, you know, that is about union power, but that is also about, you know, how we might organize around International Women's Day and have a big march and really talk about these issues and bring them to the fore of society, because actually you'll find most people out there won't disagree. So we just need to kind of keep highlighting the discrepancies between the rhetoric of the government and what they're actually doing, whether it be about Brexit or COVID or otherwise, and really just give people the solutions and the space to come together and build that solidarity amongst women and allies and everyone that really wants to move on this agenda.
And Faiza, that perfect, I don't know if you've seen it, but that perfectly actually leads me to one of the audience questions that we've had. That is, how do we make sure that women's voices are heard, and by men, and that men are acting as allies and men are acting on what we're saying to them? Ruth or Sarah, I wonder if you want to come to that question. Sarah, and then.
Well, it's a $1 million question, isn't it? I mean, I do, but certainly in the trade union movement, it wasn't without its difficulties. We didn't just sort of walk in and say, hey, move over, blokes, this is how things are going to be done. It's a long process of persuasion, engagement, but really ultimately saying, look, if you attack one person's rights, ultimately you're undermining everybody's rights. And, you know, maybe you'll undermine women's rights first, but you wait and see what happens to everyone else's rights. And I think somebody right at the beginning mentioned intersect. It might have been you, Faiza. And I think one of the most important things, certainly at Equally Hours, the organisation I'm currently acting chair of, we're doing a huge amount on intersect, because all these issues, you're not just a woman or a black person, you are lots of things. Every human being is a composite of all sorts of different characteristics. So we've got to stop any artificial division across the equality strands, as it were, and make sure that we see that all these rights are meshed together, and that includes making sure that men see that they also have protected characteristics at different times. And this is really a struggle for all of us.
Thank you,
Ruth.
And Ruth, what more can we do to get women's heard? But you were talking about young women. What more can we do to get young women's voices heard by men?
Yeah, just picking up Sarah's point, really, I think that, you know, one of the things I wish it would be nice if we could just plough on and believe that everybody would come with us in a great big sort of wave of progress, but it's not like that. And I do sometimes get frustrated at the fact that we have to stand still and explain, and but I think that's time well spent, because clearly we have to carry men with us, else nothing will change. And I think one of the strategies we've employed is, you know, to be really, really clear, as Sarah said, that when we change things for women, we change things for everybody. What works for women works for everybody. So we had a big campaign, for instance, on women's journeys to work, because we found that significant numbers of women, and again, particularly young women, who are far more likely to use public transport, were telling us that they didn't feel safe when they were going to and from work, often very early in the morning or late at night. So we were really clear that the measures we were taking to change things in the workplace wouldn't just work for women, they would work for men as well. And that, you know, that was a campaign that carried everybody with us. In terms of how we prioritise the voice of young women, I think that's an issue right across the trade union movement. And again, it goes back to making sure that our structures are representative, making sure that we are putting women's voices at the heart of what we do, and making sure that we're focusing on the right issues and not assuming we know what members want, but making sure we take the time to listen.
Absolutely. Faiza, I wonder if I could come to you next, because I know that class have done some work with the Runnymede Trust on the intersection of race and class. And we've got a question here about race pay gaps are a disgrace. And we saw just last week, 23.8% ethnicity pay gap in London. And there's a question here about what would be a suggestion for what we can do to measure and track and address racial equality in the workplace and its intersection with gender inequality, and how likely is it for Black and minoritized workers, once they're in jobs, to be able to realise senior leadership positions?
Yeah, I mean, we know all those things are bad in terms of both gender and race, and actually class pay gaps as well. And so, you know, thank you for bringing up that issue. I would say the way in which these things are written into equality laws are really important. When businesses are forced to publish these statistics, then of course we can then look at those figures and hold them to account. And I think I need to have a look at what's happened on the race audit side, but I know that some businesses did start pushing on that side and did start reporting. And, you know, with all of the businesses that came out and made statements about Black Lives Matter, this is a really important opportunity for us to say, you've said that, but are you publishing what your race discrepancies are, and who is also in those positions, who is on your board, who is, you know, what's going on in terms of representation throughout your organization. And I think also, you know, where we have union members in any one of these businesses, we've got to encourage them to speak out and speak to the unions about what's really going on and where necessary to whistleblow. I think I just wanted to say this from a kind of the work we've done on race and class, is that these agendas are very quickly becoming part of a very toxic culture war, in which we are told that the working class is white and male and in the north, and everyone else, you know, fighting for equality is effectively being a nuisance, unhelpful, that actually by fighting for equality, we are being divisive. Now, that is a very strong narrative that is taking hold. And it's something that, you know, the work that Runnymede and I have done is because we've been concerned about that ever since, you know, 2015, 2016, when we could see that narrative come up. So, you know, a real warning to all of us, and especially within the trade union movement, is to talk about the working class being multi-ethnic, to talk about the women, to talk about, you know, that there are working class people in London as well. And the value and the importance of us standing together and coming together and not allowing these divisive narratives that say, don't talk about white privilege because otherwise you're going to hurt white working class kids. I mean, this is what we were hearing last week from the Tories. It's just incredibly frustrating, and it really will block change. It's completely put together to distract us from the failures of this government on austerity, underinvestment, inequalities. And so, you know, this is the women's agenda as well is being brought into this culture war. So it's really important. And I've heard too many people say this. I was speaking to a Labour MP the other day that said to me, I don't really care about the culture war. No, we're not going to see the policies that we want to see unless we also have a story, a message about the kind of country we are and the kind of country we want to be as well.
Absolutely. And Gloria, I'm just turning to you. We've got a question here about what on a practical level can attendees from today go away and do? What measures could we look at in local government and national government? How can we make sure that they're prioritising in those agencies equality so we can build back better?
Well, I think one of the key points in terms of the public sector in particular and private contractors who provide public services is, you know, we have not been using the public sector equality duty to its full capacity and its maximum potential. And that's one of the most heartbreaking part of it that I find, that, you know, we have that tool. It's a very important tool and we should be making more use of it. So I would ask everyone who works either in the private sector providing public services or in the public sector to go back and negotiate the priorities that they want to see happen in their workplace in terms of this. I know in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, they have a more progressive approach in terms of the specific duty in addition to the general duty, and people could, you know, put their equality demands in a collective forum on the agenda using those collective trade union rights that I talked about, you know, the joint negotiating committee, the trade union committees, they can do that. The other issues around health and safety, there are so many issues around health and safety that people can deal with. And I've said a lot of the equality reps who do not have time off for trade union duties could become trade union health and safety reps specializing in equality, dealing with the equality components of health and safety. You know, we have a lot of PPE that doesn't fit women. We have a lot of issues around disproportionate deaths among some Black people working in certain sectors, and also the issue of health and safety is something that I think we could use the law to the force in terms of making people health and safety reps, giving them those statutory workplace rights that they need, training them up to do those you know, risk assessments and to be able to protect members at work. Very good organizing opportunity as well, good opportunity for development and skills. And the other, sorry, I'm just, one other part, it's okay. I was going to say a few things in terms of what people can do. But I think in terms of audits, I think we need to get those equality audits done. We need to map and monitor what's happening, and we need to make sure that we do the equality impact analysis in terms of these redundancies that are coming down. You know, otherwise, if we're not going to be doing that, and to look at the pool of redundancy need to be the whole workforce, not just where women or pregnant women are, or disabled women, or younger women or older women. So these are the practical things I think we can do.
And such a useful note to end on, those equality impact assessments. Not only are employers doing them, but is our government doing them? Because if they are, they surely can see the impact of their policies at the moment and how they are disproportionately disadvantaging women, and in particular certain groups of women. And so, Gloria, I think that's a brilliant note. I'm conscious that we want to finish on time, but I want to say what an absolute privilege it has been here to be here with you today, sisters, Ruth, Sarah, Faiza, Gloria. I am so energized and emboldened and empowered coming away from this, and I can see from the comments that so too are those who've attended. Thank you to everybody that joined us. It's been a real pleasure. Let's keep organizing ourselves. Let's come together, make those spaces to hear each other, to ensure equality is prioritized. And thank you for your hard work, Women's Budget Group, Faiza and Sarah, for your work on the Commission, and thank you to Gloria and Ruth and to your unions for all that you're doing now. I will wrap it up here, but thank you all very much. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye. And thank you, Shan, for chairing. Thank you. Take care.
Bye.